My name is Alina. I'm 27 years old. And after an exhausting 18-hour shift at the hospital, I came home to find that my own house key no longer worked. At first I thought maybe I was just too tired. Maybe my hands were shaky from the long night, but when I tried again, it was the same. The lock had been changed. When the door finally opened, standing there was my stepmother, Carla. She had on yoga pants, a wine-stained t-shirt, and a smirk that told me she'd been waiting for this moment. In her hand was her phone, and in her voice was that tone she always used whenever she wanted me to know I didn't really belong. "Oh," she said, pretending to be surprised, "you're home early." Behind her, sprawled across the couch like she owned the place, was my stepsister, Tessa. She had on my hoodie, scrolling endlessly on TikTok with that half-bored, half-smug look she'd perfected since we were kids. And sitting next to her, crunching loudly on chips that I bought, was her boyfriend, a guy who had never held a steady job in his life. "The key doesn't work," I said, still trying to process what was happening. "Right," Carla answered quickly. "We changed the locks. Rent's gone up. If you want to live here, it's $36,000 in back rent, plus utilities. Tessa needs a vacation, and frankly, you're a doctor. You can afford it." She said it so casually, like she was asking me to chip in a few bucks for takeout. But what she was really doing was extorting me. I just stood there, my duffel bag hanging from my shoulder, shoes sticking to the welcome mat. I stared at her, really stared, at the woman my dad married when I was barely old enough to drive. The one who insisted I call her Carla instead of stepmom. Because stepmom sounds too formal, but never once treated me like her own family. "Did Dad agree to this?" I asked quietly. Carla smirked and leaned on the doorframe. "Your father's overseas. He left me in charge. This is my house while he's gone. My rules." I glanced past her into the living room. My medical textbooks were still stacked neatly on the floor where I had left them. My name was still on the utility bills. I had just paid them last month, but none of that mattered now, not to her. "Understood," I said. Just one word. I nodded once, turned around, and walked back to my car. I didn't slam the door. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just drove off into the night, the ache in my chest sharper than any shift I had ever worked. That night, instead of collapsing into my own bed, I crashed in a call room at the hospital. The mattress was plastic, the blanket was thin and scratchy, and everything smelled faintly of disinfectant. I slept in short, shallow bursts, because, even in my exhaustion, my brain kept circling back to what had just happened. And while I was lying on that thin mattress, Carla and Tessa were probably celebrating. Maybe they poured themselves another glass of boxed wine, laughing about how clever they were for pushing me out. Maybe Tessa even made a TikTok about it, adding some snarky caption about how freeloaders don't get free rides forever. But what they didn't know, what they could never guess, was that I had been waiting for this day for years. The very next morning, before they were even awake, I drove back to the house. I parked down the street, walked up to the front door, and placed a sealed envelope right in the middle of the doormat, where Carla would be sure to see it. Then I went back to my car and waited. Right on schedule, at 9:02 a.m. sharp, the front door creaked open. Carla came out in fuzzy slippers, holding her favorite mug, the one with peeling glitter letters that said "Number 1 Mom." She bent down, picked up the envelope, and opened it. The scream that came out of her throat wasn't a gasp or a cry, it was a full-throated guttural sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. A dog started barking down the street. Lights flicked on across the road. Curtains twitched as neighbors peeked out. I stayed in my car, hidden but close enough to see her face. Confusion, rage, panic all at once, like someone had told her the world was ending. She shouted for Tessa. My stepsister stumbled out onto the porch, squinting against the sunlight. She took one look at the paper in Carla's hands, and her own scream joined in. But me, I didn't move. I didn't smile. I didn't flinch. I just sat there, calm and steady, because this was only the beginning. You see, I used to think of that house as safe. When I was a little girl, it was my whole world. It was where I ran after soccer practice, after school, after heartbreaks. My dad worked long hours, but he always came home smelling faintly of soap and hospital sanitizer. He'd sit beside me while I did my homework, sometimes nodding off with a medical journal in his lap. And my mom, my real mom, she made the house warm. She filled it with cinnamon candles, soft throw blankets, and hugs that lasted just a little too long. That house felt like love, until she died. I was only 12 when the accident happened. She was on her way back from picking up decorations for my birthday party when the car was hit. Just like that, she was gone. At the funeral, my dad didn't cry. He sat stiff and stoic, but I remember the way his hand gripped my shoulder so tight, like if he let go, we'd both collapse. For a while, it was just the two of us. Two people in the same lifeboat, doing everything we could not to sink. Then came Carla. I was 15 when they got married. She brought Tessa with her, and from the very beginning, it was like oil and water between us. Tessa was loud, entitled, and constantly rolling her eyes at everything. I was quiet, studious, and according to her, the weird one. Not long after, my dad accepted a long-term overseas contract through a military medical program. He said it was temporary. He said he'd be back before I knew it. But that left Carla in charge of the house, and overnight, everything changed. The throw blankets disappeared. The cinnamon candles were swapped for cheap lavender plugins. My mom's framed photo vanished from the hallway. When I asked once if I could keep it in my room, Carla looked at me like I'd asked to hang a dead animal on the wall. "Don't you think it's time we all moved on?" she said. But what she meant was, "Don't you think it's time I erased your mother completely?" So, I kept my head down. I buried myself in school. I got into college early, pre-med. Spent every summer working internships or jobs just to avoid being home. When I was there, I paid my share. More than my share, actually. I bought groceries. I paid utilities. I even fixed the leaking bathroom sink myself when Carla said she didn't want to deal with plumbers. She never once said thank you. By the time I finished med school, I had stopped expecting her to treat me fairly. I thought if I just stayed quiet and helpful, she would leave me alone. But I was wrong. The moment I started earning a real salary, it was like a switch flipped. Suddenly, every conversation at the dinner table circled back to money. At first, it was little comments here and there. Carla would sigh dramatically and say things like, "Raising girls is so expensive, you know? It's only fair that everyone contributes more now." Or she'd glance at Tessa and talk about how her poor daughter had never had a proper vacation. How she deserved a break after everything she'd been through. But over time, those hints grew sharper, less passive, more aggressive. One evening, while I was heating up leftovers I'd bought with my own money, Carla walked in and just laid it out. "You should really start paying back rent for all the years you lived under this roof," she said, leaning against the counter with a glass of wine. From the couch, Tessa chimed in without even looking up from her phone. "Yeah, it's only fair. You're a doctor now. You can afford it." I just stared at the microwave, watching the lasagna turn in slow circles. I thought about how surreal it was being financially mugged in your own kitchen. I didn't answer. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just let the silence hang there, heavy and uncomfortable. And then, just a few days later, I came home and found the locks had been changed. That's when I gave them the letter. It wasn't angry. It wasn't emotional. It was strictly business. Inside the envelope was a formal eviction notice, stapled to a copy of the property deed, the deed with my name on it. Because what Carla and Tessa never knew, what they never bothered to ask, was that the house had been legally transferred to me when I turned 21. My dad bought that house long before he ever met Carla. It was his outright, his separate property, and he placed it in a trust for me. He told me back then, "I want you to be protected no matter what happens." So I had kept quiet, I never bragged. I never held it over them. I still paid bills. I still contributed. I still played nice. All because I hoped maybe, just maybe, if I kept the peace long enough, they'd treat me like family. Instead, they treated me like a cash machine. So when Carla demanded $36,000 and a vacation fund for Tessa, I handed her 30 days to pack up and leave, and she did not take it well. The moment she saw the eviction notice, her scream shook the entire street. Tessa snatched the papers out of her hand and started yelling too, her face twisting with fury. Later that night, my phone lit up with voicemails and texts. Carla's voice was sharp, almost manic. "This is fake," she snapped in one message. "You forged this. You think you're clever, but you're not. We'll get a lawyer. You're going to regret this." Then came the guilt trips. "How could you do this to us? After everything we gave you. Your father will hear about this, but the house was never theirs. They just never imagined the day would come when I'd stop pretending." In the meantime, I stayed with a friend from med school, Derek. He was the type of guy who always had protein powder blending and sports games streaming in the background. He didn't ask many questions. When I told him it was family drama, he just shrugged and offered me his spare room. "Cool," he said. "Just don't steal my socks." For the first time in years, I felt a little lighter, but the calls didn't stop. Carla, Tessa, even Tessa's useless boyfriend. They rotated through like some kind of twisted guilt carousel. "You're really going to throw your own family out on the street? We took care of you when no one else would. You owe us for everything we did." The thing was, when I really thought about it, I couldn't remember a single thing they'd given me that didn't come with strings attached, side eyes or backhanded comments, unless you count the anxiety, which they gave freely. So I ignored them. I let the messages pile up. I figured they'd eventually burn themselves out. I was wrong. Carla switched tactics. She went online. 2 days later, a vague Facebook post appeared on her page. "It's a sad day when someone you raise turns their back on you. Some people forget who fed them all these years." Subtle, right? Within hours, her old friends were flooding the comments with prayer hands and sympathy emojis. Tessa jumped in with her own contribution at TikTok, where she lip-synced to some trending sad audio clip while text on the screen read, "POV, your evil sister evicts you because you asked her to pay rent for once in her life." By the next morning, I had texts from extended relatives I hadn't heard from in years. "Is everything okay?" Carla said. "You're being aggressive." She mentioned lawyers. "What's going on?" I didn't reply to any of them. Instead, I called my lawyer. I sent him the trust paperwork, the deed transfer, the eviction notice, screenshots of Carla's Facebook post, and Tessa's TikTok. Then I opened a folder on my computer, labeled it proof, and started saving everything. Every text, every voicemail, every vague social media jab. Because I knew they were spiraling, and I intended to document it all. A few nights later, Carla called again. This time, I picked up. "So you're really doing this?" She spat, skipping. "Any greeting, double quotes, yes," I said calmly. "You'll regret it. This house was a gift to this family. It was a gift to me." "Literally check the deed," I replied. She sputtered something about betrayal, about moral rights, about how my father would never forgive me. "I already spoke to him," I told her. "He'll be home soon. Just wait." And I hung up. Because the truth was, Dad had called me the very night after I dropped the eviction letter. His voice was quiet, tired, but not angry. "I figured it would come to this," he admitted. "You knew?" I asked. "I didn't know they'd lock you out," he said. "But I knew they were pushing too far. I'd been hearing things." Turns out, neighbors and mutual friends had been reaching out to him, concerned about the way Carla and Tessa were talking about me. At first, he didn't want to believe it. But the more he heard, the more he realized they weren't just ungrateful, they were trying to drive me out. And then he said the words I'd been waiting years to hear. I stand with you, Alina. Send me the documents. I'll handle it. That's when I finally let myself breathe. But Carla and Tessa didn't know that. They still thought they could bluff their way through, a week before the eviction deadline. I got a text from Carla. We're not leaving. This isn't legal. I'm his wife. That house is half mine. So I had my lawyer send another official letter, this time through certified mail. It spelled everything out in black and white. The trust, the deed, the fact that my father had purchased the house before his marriage to her, making it his separate property, which he had full legal right to give to me. The paperwork was airtight. No loopholes, no mistakes. I expected silence after that, but instead, they doubled down on us, made another TikTok, this time crying into the camera about how I was throwing them out onto the street. Carla posted another Facebook rant. Some people forget where they came from. We gave her everything. Now she wants us homeless. I screenshotted it all and added it to the proof folder. That same day, I got a call from one of the neighbors' Mises. Green, a sweet older lady who used to bake cookies when I was a kid. They're telling people you forged the deed, she said gently. That's fine, I told her. I'm not here to win Facebook. I'm here to reclaim my house. But the harassment wasn't done yet. 3 days before the deadline, I left the hospital after a long shift and found a piece of paper taped to my windshield. It was a sloppy typed note that read, if you go through with this, we'll make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are. Don't test us. No signature. No courage. Just desperation. I smiled, took a photo, and added it to the folder. Because here's the thing about threats. When you've already lost your patience, your peace, and your tolerance, there's nothing left they can take from you. Let them scream. Let them post. Let them threaten. I had the deed. I had the law. And most importantly, I had enough. The deadline was almost here. And so was my dad. The morning of the deadline, I parked 2 streets over before walking toward the house. It felt strange, approaching my own front door like a visitor. Like I was sneaking into enemy territory. The blinds were drawn tight, but I could hear raised voices even from the sidewalk. Carla's sharp shrillness, Tessa's dramatic wails. They were performing for each other, for anyone within earshot, maybe even for themselves. I had my lawyer on speed dial. I had the sheriff's number written down, and in my backpack was a thick folder of documents, labeled in neat black ink, ownership and eviction. But I wasn't alone. My dad was with me. He looked older than the last time I'd seen him, thinner, with a tiredness that clung to his shoulders. But his eyes were steady, focused, and for once, not clouded by the need to keep peace. You ready? He asked quietly. I nodded when I slid my key into the lock. It turned smoothly. Carla must not have bothered changing it back after their dramatic stunt weeks ago. The door creaked open, and immediately the shrieking began. You don't belong here, Carla screamed from the couch, wine glass in hand, even though it was barely 10 in the morning. This is my house. You're not going to steal it from me. Tessa appeared at her side, phone raised like a weapon. Smile for TikTok, she sneered. Everyone's gonna see how heartless you are. I didn't answer. I just stepped aside so they could see who was standing behind me. When my dad walked in, the room froze. Carla's face drained of color. Tessa's phone dropped a few inches. Richard, Carla said, her voice breaking into a fake softness. Thank God you're here. She's gone insane. She's trying to throw us out. You have to stop her. But my dad didn't look at her. He didn't even glance in Tessa's direction. His eyes were fixed on me. This is Alina's house, he said firmly. It always has been. The silence that followed was like a bomb going off. Carla blinked, mouth opening and closing, like a fish gasping for air. Tessa actually dropped her phone this time, the clatter echoing across the hardwood floor. What are you talking about? Carla snapped finally, her voice shaking. "This is our home. You gave it to us." "No," my dad said, his voice low but steady. "I bought this house long before you and I met. It was my separate property. And when Elena turned 21, I transferred it into her name. That was my choice, my right, and my promise to her." Carla's wine glass slipped from her fingers and shattered. "You what?" "I knew," he continued, "that one day she'd need a place where she'd be safe. Somewhere no one could take from her. I didn't expect you to make that happen so quickly, but here we are." Tessa stomped forward, her voice shrill. "So you're just gonna let her make us homeless? After everything Mom's done for you? After everything I've given up?" Dad's head turned slowly, and the look on his face made even Tessa falter. "What exactly have you given up?" he asked. "From where I stand, it looks like you've been handed everything and squandered." That hit harder than I expected. For years, Dad had been soft with her, indulgent, as though trying to overcompensate. Hearing him finally call her out was almost surreal. Carla's voice went high and frantic. "You can't just side with her. You can't. I'm your wife. This is my life. You can't do this to us." "You did this to yourselves," Dad said simply. Carla lunged toward him, desperate. "I'll call a lawyer. We'll fight this." "You already lost," I said, stepping forward at last. I pulled a folder from my backpack, laid it on the coffee table, and opened it so the deed was staring back at them. "Here's the proof. Every document, every legal signature, every timestamp. This isn't up for debate." Tessa crossed her arms, face red and blotchy. "You're such a snake," she spat at me. "All these years, pretending to be broke while you had this in your back pocket. You set us up." I almost laughed. "Set you up?" I lived here, paid bills, kept quiet, and tried to keep the peace. The only people who set themselves up are the ones who thought they could bully me forever. Dad put a hand on my shoulder. "Enough. You don't owe them any more explanations." That's when the sheriff knocked. Carla screamed again, a raw, panicked sound. "You called the cops on your own family." "No," I said calmly. "I called them on 2 people trespassing in my house." The sheriff was polite, but firm. He'd seen this 1,000 times before. He glanced at the paperwork, nodded once, and then turned to Carla and Tessa. "You have 30 minutes to gather your essentials and leave. If you need to come back for anything else, you'll need to arrange it through me," Carla wailed. Tessa stomped upstairs, slamming doors, muttering curses, and I just stood there, finally, blessedly, still. Because it was done. 30 minutes later, I watched them leave. Carla had 2 suitcases, her face streaked with mascara. Muttering under her breath about betrayal and injustice, Tessa carried a duffel bag and her phone, glaring at me with a hatred that could have cut glass. They paused on the front step. "This isn't over," Carla hissed. The first week after the eviction felt like walking into sunlight after years in a basement. I could breathe again. I could come home without bracing myself for slammed doors or muttered insults. For the first time in forever, the house was quiet. But Carla and Tessa weren't done. It started with little things. Packages went missing from my porch. Flyers for cash homebuyers appeared in my mailbox. Then came the calls from relatives, who had heard the whole story from Carla. "She says you forged the deed. She says you kicked them out on the street with nothing. She says your father is devastated." I didn't waste my breath explaining. I just said, "Check the records," and hung up. Then one night, while I was finishing up chart notes from a long shift, the power went out. Not just a flicker, the whole house plunged into darkness. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. That's when I saw it. The circuit box pried open, wires dangling, and parked just down the street. Tessa's boyfriend's beat-up Honda Civic. I didn't shout. I didn't march over. I just took photos, called the utility company, and then filed a police report the next morning. I added the pictures to my proof folder. 2 days later, Carla tried her boldest move yet. She showed up at the hospital. I was in the break room, halfway through a cup of bad coffee, when one of the nurses peeked in. "Alina, there's a woman out front asking for you. Says she's your mother." My stomach dropped. Sure enough, there she was in the lobby, all crocodile tears and trembling hands. The moment she saw me, she lunged forward, loud enough for everyone in earshot. "She's lying," she cried. "She stole my house. She forged the papers. Please, someone listen to me." Every pair of eyes in the room turned to me. I didn't flinch. I just pulled out my phone, opened the scanned deed, and held it up. "This is public record. She doesn't live with me anymore. Please escort her out." Security came within minutes. Carla screamed the whole way, clawing at the air, like a trapped animal. But they walked her out, calm and firm. That was the last time she tried in person. After that, everything moved online. Tessa flooded TikTok with crying videos, claiming I had ruined her future, that she was homeless and abandoned. Carla wrote long Facebook rants about betrayal, about how blood should mean something. But the thing was, nobody was buying it anymore. Neighbors who'd seen their behavior firsthand chimed in on posts, gently but firmly correcting the lies. Extended family who'd initially wavered started reaching out to me, apologizing for believing the rumors. Even Tessa's classmates began mocking her dramatics, leaving sarcastic comments like, "Didn't you just post a pool selfie yesterday?" Their story unraveled, thread by thread. And then came the final blow. My dad filed for divorce. It wasn't a dramatic announcement. He called me one evening while I was cooking pasta and said, "I've spoken to a lawyer. I can't stay with someone who tried to destroy you. Papers are being filed." I didn't know what to say at first. Carla had been part of our lives for so long, even if most of those years had been bitter and cold. But deep down, I felt nothing but relief. When the news reached Carla, she lost it. She posted a Facebook essay so long it had to be split in two. 3 screenshots, accusing my dad of betraying his vows and choosing a selfish daughter over the family he built. It backfired. Badly, because people started asking the obvious questions. Why would a husband divorce a wife if her story was true? Why would a father side with his daughter if she was lying? Why had Carla never mentioned the trust or the deed before? By the time the dust settled, their credibility was gone. Tessa tried one last stunt. She showed up at the house with her boyfriend, banging on the door, screaming that she forgot her things. I told her calmly through the locked door that she could schedule a supervised pickup through the sheriff's office. She cursed me out, kicked the porch railing, and stormed off. That was the last I saw of her. In the weeks that followed, the house transformed. I painted the walls, fixed the garden Carla had let go wild, replaced the broken blinds with soft curtains that let the light pour in. Every nail hammered, every brushstroke, every box unpacked felt like reclaiming a piece of myself they had tried to erase, and slowly, I realized something. This wasn't just about a house, it was about boundaries. For years, I thought keeping the peace meant sacrificing myself, that if I just gave more, tolerated more, endured more, eventually they'd see me as family. But peace built on silence isn't peace-yid's captivity. The day I handed them that eviction letter, I chose myself. And choosing myself didn't make me cruel. It made me free. One evening, Dad came over with takeout. We ate on the porch, the sun setting behind the trees, the air soft and warm. "You did good, kid," he said, raising his glass of iced tea. "You stood up when it mattered." I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. "I just wish it hadn't come to this." He shook his head. "No, they made their choices. You just stopped paying the bill for them." We sat there in silence for a while, the cicadas buzzing in the distance, the house solid and quiet around us. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was home, and it was mine. But it was, they just didn't know it yet. When the door shut behind them, the silence that filled the house was deafening. For the first time in years, I could hear myself think. I turned to my dad, who was standing in the entryway, shoulders sagging. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have stepped in sooner." "You did today," I replied, and that was enough. That night, I slept in my own bed for the first time in weeks. No banging doors, no guilt-tripping monologues, no passive-aggressive sighs. Just the quiet hum of the ceiling fan and the soft creak of the house settling, as though even the walls were relieved. But peace doesn't erase scars. Over the next few days, I started sorting through the damage. I found bills that hadn't been paid, letters from the HOA that Carla had ignored, even a few hidden credit card offers addressed to me that had mysteriously gone missing from the mailbox. They hadn't just leached, they'd schemed. I documented it all. Added it to the proof folder, because Carla was right about one thing. This wasn't over, and I wanted to be ready when they tried again.